Hey listeners, before we get started, just want to mention that there's a little bit of swearing in this interview. So parents, if you're listening with kids, leave it up to your discretion. And now, on with the show.
Maintaining that intimate relationship, that's what marketers do, right? They listen and they find out where people are and what they're talking about and what their needs are and how to bring value back to them.
Hey everyone, welcome to Bright and Early, the podcast for people building early stage startups. I'm your host, Brian Ray. I talk to entrepreneurs, product people, designers, and marketing pros about their experiences during the early days to help you feel just a little less crazy. My guest today is Georgiana Laudi, also known as Gia. Gia is a SaaS marketing and growth advisor. She has a long career in marketing, but in 2009 switched her focus entirely to SaaS, working with companies like Unbounce, AppQs, and Sprout Social. In addition to working with founders and marketers one-to-one, she, along with Claire Sulentrop, who has been on this show, also co-hosts Forget the Funnel, a series of workshops for marketers in SaaS. Gia, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's completely my pleasure. So anybody who's listened to the episode with Claire knows that I've been following Forget the Funnel and the great work that the two of you have been doing for quite a while. So it's totally my pleasure.
Thanks.
So before we get into a little bit more of some topical things that I'd love to talk about, can you give us just a couple of quick minutes, a little bit more about your background and how you came to be where you are right now?
Oh, it's long.
Well, let me ask this thing. Can we just talk about we share something in common, which is that your intro to like the online, internet world was working on your dad's business, right out of university. So I'm from a super small town in Northeast Texas, Paris, Texas. And in the mid 90s, my dad ran the ISP, the internet service provider. And so I worked for him, and one of the first sites we built was an online flower shop.
You're kidding.
I am not. And so can you talk a bit about your dad's business and all of that,
Sure.
and how you got into it?
Yeah, sure. Well, when I was in university, I studied communications, and part of communications at the time, there was this a whole department dedicated to digital comms. And so we, as part of our, curriculum, we had to build websites. And so the first website that I could think of that would actually be useful in practice to somebody that I know, we built a nonprofit one to begin, but then the second website I ever built was a website for my father's business, which is the flower business. And as you likely know, at the time, flowers were, and it may still be true, I haven't actually looked this up, but at the time, flowers were the fourth most purchased item on the internet behind porn and books. And I don't even know what number 3 was, but very, very competitive, particularly for local businesses and the sort of mom and pop space it was really, really competitive then. So I sort of had this cause of helping sort of get the family business to the top of the search engines and having a great website and just sort of being at the head of that. We were the first ones on social media, and we did a lot of that stuff because it was just the timing was just perfect for me coming out of university with that. So that's kind of how I got started.
And what was where was your dad's business?
A pretty big city in sort of relative terms. And so it was pretty competitive. We were also in a suburb and not in the downtown core. So that was an additional reason why SEO outside of local sort of optimization was additionally challenging. So there was a lot of focus on top level keywords and being really targeted in that way. And it worked. I mean, that sort of sparked a bunch of other things following that. I started writing for an industry magazine for other local florists to do the same thing.
Yeah. And so that was your total entry into the entire online space.
Yeah, that sparked it. And then of course, I mean, it goes longer than that too. I went on to working at like an agency, and I did, I dabbled in a couple of things until I sort of landed on like software as a service and SaaS. Sort of really helped by Twitter as well, actually. So when joining Twitter in like late 2008, I became exposed to this whole tech community and startup community locally. And that actually, like, along with thankfully I had the online marketing sort of background I'd been working towards for like, already at that time, about 5, 6, 7 years, maybe. Actually, probably, yeah, about that. And then I sort of tipped over to the sort of tech and SaaS side of things, and I've like never looked back.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. So it was funny. I forget which podcast it was that you were on, and you were talking about your family's flower business, and you mentioned that stat about number 4. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I cracked up laughing here, doing the dishes, because that is the first e-commerce site I ever built in my life.
Wow.
Was like, a flower shop for this tiny little, boutique and near Paris. And like now looking back, makes complete sense. Apparently there's a lot of money to be made in flowers online. So
yeah, if you can do it right, there is.
Yeah. Hey, so what is your favorite podcast that you're listening to? Or actually, is there a book or a TV show that you're obsessed with that you'd love to share?
I try to listen to podcasts as much as I possibly can, but because I don't commute, I work from home, I find it actually pretty challenging to regularly listen to podcasts. But when I do, I try to catch SaaS Revolution show by SaaStock a lot. The SaaStr podcast too, I enjoy the Growth Hub podcast, SaaS Open Mic, UI Breakfast. There's a few that do really. I would love to do this every morning and listen to them every morning. I don't get to do it that often, but when I do, those are my sort of go-to. And then like non-SaaS related are usually podcasts for my kids, like stories podcasts and things like that.
Oh, nice! That's so fun. Any books you'd care to share?
Yeah, well, recently, I mean, the one that comes to mind first and foremost is actually recently, I was lucky enough April Dunford sent me an early copy of her book. And so I got to read that a couple of weeks ago, and it's absolutely fantastic and is very top of mind for me right now. And I believe, I don't know when this recording is going to go out, but it should be available like imminently, very, very soon, if not already.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to that one. She is a great follow on Twitter, so I'll link her in the show notes as well. Do you know the title of that book, perchance?
Obviously Awesome.
Obviously Awesome. Sweet. Okay, right on. Okay, well, let's get into a couple of topics I'd love to hear about from you. So you were a very early employee at Unbounce. You were there, and you helped take the company from like 15 to nearly 200, and then on the marketing side from 1 to 35. And so, can you talk first of all, quick description for any listeners who aren't familiar? What does Unbounce do? But then, more importantly, like what were those earliest of days like at Unbounce?
Sure. Yeah. So Unbounce, when I joined Unbounce, it was actually just a landing page platform for marketers. Now it's evolved a little bit, and there's additional sort of features and capabilities there that actually go more towards like so that marketers can build better sort of conversion experiences overall. So our whole MO was helping marketers build better marketing experiences because there's no excuse for crappy marketing anymore. Okay. So that was our whole MO, and that drove us to do some incredible work. I mean, I was really passionate about that as a marketer. Obviously, it's always sort of fun to market to marketers. But I mean, it was just a really passionate group of people, really genuine, really smart. I remember feeling I had gone from being a freelancer to being part of this team. And when you're a freelancer, it often feels like, when you're working with clients, you're like, nobody understands me, nobody knows. I gotta do so much teaching, and you sort of feel like you're the only one in the room who sort of knows what you know, obviously, as the sort of hired gun would. But when I flipped over to actually working in-house at Unbounce, I remember the stark contrast of feeling like, whoa, I'm working with a bunch of like geniuses that I'm going to learn so much from. And I was so excited to do that. So that
great
was
feeling.
Yeah, it was really, really great. The sort of humans there are forever sort of in my brain as being like my favorite part of those early days. It was a really incredible team. But I mean, early days is as how you would expect it to be. It was a bit of, chicken with your head cut off type stuff. There was a ton of opportunity, not enough hours in the day. It was chaotic, but it was super fun.
Do you think that characteristic, like running around, chickens running around with their head cut off, super chaotic, like does that characteristic feel like that's kind of a good thing in the early stages? Don't try to over organize things and lose your nimbleness, or is too much chaos bad? What was your experience of that like?
Honestly, for us, it came down to, and I think in every situation, it comes down to the founders. So if, it's okay to have uncertainty, and it's okay to work hard, and it's okay to be passionate about what you're doing and work long hours. If you're okay with that, obviously you have to be comfortable in that environment. Don't work at a startup if you're not comfortable with a bit of sort of chaos. So a comfort level with chaos is definitely par for the course, I would say. However, I think that it's really important that be balanced by really sort of a solid, I hate to say culture, because that is kind of meaningless at the end of the day, but like our founders were very focused on our professional development, our healthy growth. It was not a move fast and break things environment at all. As hard as we worked and as much hustle as there was in the room, it was never at the expense of anybody's like health or comfort level or anything like that. We were largely bootstrapped, so I think that probably had a lot to do with it. We didn't have a ton of pressure coming from the board to grow beyond or to hit targets that were totally unattainable. Don't get me wrong.
Unhealthy, yeah.
We had some pretty, lofty targets, definitely, but it was a bit of a different environment. We didn't have that same level that maybe a VC-backed startup might, which I think was a really good thing.
Hey friends, this is a great time to pause and let you know that Bright and Early is brought to you by Transistor.fm. Transistor offers you professional podcast hosting and analytics. They host this very podcast that you're listening to right now. And my friends, I gotta tell you, it could not be easier. I can tell you from personal experience. As you also probably know, podcasting is becoming one of the best ways to develop a closer relationship with your audience. And so if you're thinking about starting a podcast, trust me, look no further. Just visit transistor.fm, and if you decide to sign up, let them know that Brian sent you. Was the company still pre-product market fit when you joined and as you were growing the marketing department?
Oh, product market fit. I would not say so. No, I would say that there was a healthy amount of traction. I distinctly remember feeling like I'd missed the early bandwagon. There's already so much momentum. Damn, I wish I had gotten in earlier.
How funny.
I actually remember having that feeling when I was doing my due diligence, obviously on the company before deciding to move across the country to join the team, which was obviously a big decision for me to make. So I was doing a lot of due diligence, and I remember having this feeling like they're already on their way. I got to get in there now. Like I feel like I had felt like I sort of missed the boat somehow, which is ridiculous in retrospect. But it was a bit of the feeling that I had then. I had the utmost confidence that this company was going somewhere because of how their customers talked about them, because of the team. I think the traction they were seeing. I would say we were definitely post product market fit. If we had to flip a switch, I'd say it was switched to product market fit. But I think we're probably both in agreement that product market fit can be pretty fluid, and it is definitely not something that you necessarily keep. You can definitely lose product market fit, but we were definitely in a good space for traction when I joined. And I was entirely focused on what is the best use of my time? What is our biggest opportunity? How do I sort of prioritize the plethora of opportunity ahead of me? Because the ideas were endless on ways to sort of grow. And so I was very, very focused on fueling the early traction that we saw, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it completely does. So I'm curious your process for deciding what were those things that you wanted to focus on. It's entirely contextual. Every different business at any life stage, the things that you focus on should change. They're going to. What can you share about how you come to make those decisions?
So a lot of it was about sort of evaluating what I had access to and what resources I could actually leverage relatively painlessly, if that makes sense. So part of what I knew I could leverage, it was a really great, passionate writer about, building better customer experiences. And that Ollie Gardner was very passionate. He was very well spoken and well read. Like he was sort of beloved by the marketing community. And I was like, all right, if I've got this piece, I'm just going to double down on that because I knew something that was working. So I tried to think of ways to sort of amplify that and build it up into something that was measurable and that we could sort of test against and sort of build an engine around that. So that was a big focus of mine. Another thing that I focused on a lot too in the early days was not depending on product or engineering to tee up opportunities for me. And so that was a big pain that I felt early on, which was like, we just need to do this integration. And then I've got a great excuse to reach out to, insert MarTech software here. Yes. There was an endless amount of software companies that I could have sort of sparked relationships with based on technical integrations. And I, as much as I would try to make the case and the business case for those types of product developments, I couldn't always do that, right? I wasn't always in a position to be able to affect the product roadmap. I know, shocker, as the head of marketing. But what I could do was build relationships with other companies, other sort of like-minded, sort of, friendly to us, and I air quote sort of companies. And I did a lot of that. So that was one thing that, even if there wasn't a technical integration with another piece of software, if I could, or another company and like-minded sort of brand with like-minded customers, then I could build a relationship with them even without that as part of the relationship, or like it wasn't a dependency of the relationship. So there was a lot, strategic partnerships were a big, big part of how we focused on sort of leveraging the content marketing that was working. That was another way to sort of amplify it and come up with new distribution strategies and getting buy-in and sort of mind share, for lack of a better expression, with our target audience at another company, another like-minded company. So building those relationships was another big, big part of it for us. And so if I could pinpoint one of those opportunities, I could prioritize that very easily over paid marketing, for example, which we did not prioritize for a long, long time, actually. And, not to say that was like the right thing to do, but I did not prioritize paid channels until much further along in the team's development.
Yeah, what I heard you saying there was to leverage your existing strengths rather than try to fill gaps that you don't have. Do you ever listen to or read the Farnham Street blog or listen to the Knowledge Project? Okay. Shane Parrish, fellow Canadian, actually, for you. And so this is one of the things that he hits on a lot, is that a characteristic of most successful companies or people is to leverage their existing strengths rather than identify their weaknesses and then try to fill them. And so I heard you mention that when you've got this great content marketer, you're like, okay, we're going to leverage this. And don't depend on future features. Like, don't try to sell people to say, hey, yeah, we're going to do that in 3 months. For reasons good and bad, that thing may or may not ever be built. And then finally, strategic partnerships. Use your existing strengths. Like, where are you good, and what do you currently have, and who would be interested in that strategically.
100%. I had this like formula that I used early days, and it was literally in a spreadsheet, and it was called like my PETA score, my pain in the ass score. And if it required dev resources, it was like an automatic, like it would be 10 points would be deducted, like it was like opportunity versus pain versus like, and dev requirement was like its own column and just really had a massive impact on the things that I would prioritize. Because I mean, look, at the end of the day, you have to work with what you have, and there's no point in sort of sitting on your hands until you can get the dev resources that you need for this thing that, would probably make a big difference. But at the end of the day, you still have to move forward and make progress. And yes, leverage your strengths for sure is a big part of it.
So you say on your site, like you help post product market. I mean, again, product market fit, but you help B2B companies scale for growth.
Right.
And so for our listeners who are imagining themselves getting to that point one day, right now, they're just still trying to find some traction, and position themselves for growth. So what do you see, like what mistakes do you see people make, or what do you see good things people do, like that they could be doing today to set themselves up for success down the road?
The good thing that I see folks doing, that I see a lot of founders doing an amazing job of now, it more and more, is prioritizing getting to know their customers and their future customers, their potential customers, their existing customers. And there's so much of that now, way, way, way more than there ever has been before. Like, customer research is like finally, and I know I'm definitely preaching to the choir with you, is finally sort of seeing its day in the sun in terms of even those fiercely product focused founders, or even engineering focused or tech focused founders, as opposed to the, CX or marketing sort of side of founders. So I'm really excited to see that. One of the things that I think could probably be addressed sooner than later is hiring somebody to continue that once you're too busy to do it anymore, and to sort of be responsible for bringing that voice of customer into the organization in a sort of steady, continuous way, and sort of maintaining that relationship with the customer long after the CEO, for example, isn't able to do it themselves anymore. So hiring for that role, sometimes that role is marketing, sometimes it's a CX role, sometimes it's a CS role. But I see companies wait way, way, way too long to hire for that. And then there's a disconnect that sort of hits, right? Because you're so focused on customers in the beginning, and you get into sort of product development based on that, which is really solid. And then at a certain point, if you start to see a tiny bit of traction, all of a sudden there's no time to do that stuff anymore. And you quickly fall out of the amazing habit that you had at the beginning, which was staying very close to customers and having that relationship and pulling those insights back to the team. It's not something that you as the CEO are able to do anymore at a certain point. And so I see people wait too long to hire for that. And also, too long to hire marketers, sort of period. So it's like the customer research side of things, the customer insight side of things, and bring that back to the team, but also the marketing side of like, what is your brand story? You know, where are your customers hanging out? You know, maintaining that intimate relationship. That's what marketers do, right? They listen and they find out where people are and what they're talking about and what their needs are and how to bring value back to them. And that's a marketer's job in the early days. And there's, you know, I think founders often wait too long to do that. And there ends up being a sort of hole in the middle between being super close to your customers and then like, oh, acquisition is like an emergency now. Quick, let's get a marketer in here.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have, as you're talking there, something that occurred to me is, you know, if some number of hires have been made, hypothetically, like development and whatever, development design. Do you have thoughts on the approach of everybody in the organization spends 1 week or a day or some regularly scheduled amount of time doing customer service or sitting in on customer interviews?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, that was part of, referencing Unbounce, every single employee that started at the company, even if you were an engineer, it doesn't matter what department you were coming into, even if you were in finance, you would spend a week in sitting in with the customer success team and responding to tickets and taking phone calls. It was it was mandatory onboarding into the company. Wow. Now I hear about a lot more companies that actually do that. And I think it's really, really positive.
Did that continue on after onboarding, like at a regularly scheduled interval?
You know what? That's a good question. I don't believe so. Okay. But the customer success team really Unbounce is held in very high standing, as I believe it should be in every company. The most customer facing, those most intimately familiar, your internal experts on your customers need to be held in very, very high standing. They are the closest to your customers, and you should really be driven by that. And that team has a lot of value to provide the rest of the company. And so, though they may, maybe the finance guy might have not sat in, responding to support tickets, in his second year, but we would definitely all be present for and very attuned to what our CS team was telling us about our customers' needs.
That's good.
As by proxy, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So if I had, I'm in the early stages, and if I had zero budget to invest in marketing, how would you but I've got time. How would you recommend I spend that time?
You don't have time. Come on.
Such a good answer.
Okay. You have to, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but where are your customers hanging out? Find out where your customers are hanging out and hang out there, and listen and be useful. That is probably the most worthwhile way to spend your time. And that's like the tip of the iceberg, obviously. But that's probably the first thing that I would do, and it's the first thing that I recommend the companies that I work with do. And if I start working with the company who's actually, post-launch or a little bit further along, and they're not yet doing that in some capacity, or anybody on the team, that is a must. You've got to be there, especially because, if you want to be, you keep your ear to the ground, learn as much as you can early days, obviously, but in the later phases of a company, those are the spaces where you want to make sure you're returning to provide a ton of value time and time again, and sort of establish yourself as a thought leader in those spaces and build relationships with others in those spaces. It will never hurt you to stay engaged in that way. And again, that is one way of doing it. There are a lot of other ways of doing it. That's just, to me, that feels like the lowest hanging fruit, the lowest barrier. Obviously, a close second would be get customers on the phone with you.
Yes.
But in absence of that would be the other thing that I would suggest.
Yeah. Find out where your customers are hanging out. Give first. Teach first.
Yep. And listen.
Okay. So, and then let's say now things have gone well, and I've got some budget of 10,000 to 25 something thousand. Like not all the money in the world, but we're growing and we've got something to invest. How would you recommend I spend my budget?
Okay, so unfortunately, the answer to this is going to be it depends.
Okay,
but
good answer.
it will. What it depends on really is how marketing savvy are you, and even on top of that, is marketing something you enjoy? Do you enjoy learning about it, and do you enjoy doing it, and are you good at it? So basically, what's the desire on your part to actually continue giving marketing its fair? It's fair sort of time and resources, because too often it will be a founder who doesn't have a marketing background, who's just like, the build it and they will come sort of scenario, and they lean on that. But savvier founders know that they can't afford to do that. So if you enjoy doing marketing, then there's a lot of things you can do. I would say one of an easy thing to do would be like test your messaging. So once you've done that listening and you have some hypotheses around what sort of language your customers use or what they want to see in your product, then you can test some of that stuff. So we used to talk about that too at Unbounce, like test messaging on landing pages and spend a little bit of money on some paid campaigns to test some messaging and see what resonates. Obviously, you cannot be, can I swear?
You can, yes.
Don't be an asshole about it. Like, don't make false promises or any of that. But you can test messaging with some paid ads relatively easily. That's a very compartmentalized way to sort of spend some of that budget. Another thing that I would do, even in advance of a product existing or your product launching, would be to do something useful for your future customers. So maybe that's write a guide or put a piece of content together that helps them be more successful at what they're doing, and then get it professionally maybe written, or at least professionally copy edited, or maybe even professionally designed, but don't put out, garbage. It's got to be really, really good. So it's definitely worthwhile investing in quality content. And then at the end of the day, if marketing does not come naturally to you, or you are not, you don't believe you're going to give it its fair time, then I would definitely suggest hiring a marketer. Even if just a part-time marketer, but somebody dedicated to thinking about these things that just don't come as naturally to you.
Okay, we're winding down on time here. So, final thought that I've been asking folks is, as you're well aware, working on startups can make you feel a little nuts if you don't actively work on maintaining your peace of mind and your sanity. Are there any practices that you've found helpful that you would like to share? This can be like anywhere on the spectrum, from here's how to do to-do lists all the way over to meditate. What have you found helpful?
Yeah, I would love to be like, get a hobby. But I've actually always been really terrible at like get a hobby being my solution to managing like stress, especially now that I have children. That's like not a thing. So I am quickly taken out of a work environment when my kids arrive home, and I'm like, okay, in a totally different land right now. And actually that's helped me. I have to say that's helped me a lot. So something that is hugely important in my life outside of my work was a big moment for me. So, and I now have that because I have kids. So my job is not the most important or most critical thing happening in my life anymore. It's my children. So that has helped me a lot. And the other thing that I would say, and this is a sort of in practice thing, and it's still definitely something I'm working on, still mastering myself, but I talk about this a lot with the companies that I work with and with students, is building a plan and collecting feedback on it and sharing it, because it can make a huge difference to like shiny object syndrome. And I find that shiny object syndrome can be the source of stress, especially if you are, let's say, a head of marketing or like not a founder, even if you are a founder, but if you're not a founder inside of a startup, and it can be very distracting, intimidating, call it what you want, when the founder's like, hey, why aren't we doing XYZ? and you're like, oh, wait, we should be doing XYZ. Shit, I didn't think about XYZ. Okay, new plan. So what I found can really help mitigate that is that, I mean, call it OKRs, call it a 90-day strategy, call it whatever you want. But building a plan for a month, a quarter at a time. I like a quarter because I can think about it in terms of like 12-week spans, and sort of build a plan for what do you want to accomplish in those 12 weeks. Draft something up. Bring an early draft to your stakeholders or other department heads and sort of get their feedback on what you're going to be focused on in the coming quarter. If you can get what they're working on in the coming quarter, that's even better. But if you sort of share an early version, then sort of refine and make sure you've taken everybody else's needs into account that might impact your upcoming quarter. Then you can sort of finalize it and circulate it throughout the team, so that when shiny object syndrome, sort of rears its ugly head, which it inevitably will, your own and theirs, you have a reference point. You have something to sort of lean back on and say, that's a really great idea, but this is what we all agreed and what I, decided I was going to focus on in this quarter, and so I'm going to put that in the parking lot for next quarter. Or what am I going to reprioritize? So if one thing on your 90-day plan or your OKRs actually doesn't feel like the highest priority anymore, you have to make it a concerted decision about what you're going to throw over the fence to the next quarter. And that's a decision that can be made. You can't be inflexible, but it's a decision that has to be made. And that it can be especially helpful for people who are maybe a little bit more mid-career or more junior, where it makes the conversation of like, that sounds like a really great idea and it sounds really important. What do you think I should take off my plate in order to do that this quarter? It just makes having those conversations a little bit easier. So it's like a sanity saver a bit.
Yep. Yeah. There's so much good stuff in there. I mean, personally, I don't know what you mean by shiny object syndrome. I've never struggled with that.
No, never. Yeah. Me neither. That's an other people's problem.
Yeah, right. Hey, Gia, how can listeners find and follow you online?
Yeah, well, I'm always findable on Twitter, hang out there a lot. My Twitter handle is an odd one. Could have had my first name. Didn't grab it at the time, but it's GGIIAA is where you can find me on Twitter. Also, I would definitely say check out Forget the Funnel, because that's a good free content out in the ether. So forgetthefunnel.com. And then also Claire Salentrop, who you talked about at the beginning of the episode, who you've done a previous podcast with. Her and I are now doing essentially what I've been doing for the last couple of years with SaaS companies, which is working one-on-one. So her and I are now working together in that way, and you can find us at heyelevate.com.
My guest today has been Gia Laudi. Gia, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me today.
Thanks so much, Brian. That was fun.
All right, a couple closing thoughts from me here. So you may have probably heard Gia kind of chuckle about product market fit, and not a coincidence that the book that she recommended was April Dunford. I imagine that a connection Gia was making there is that April Dunford had recently, I'll link to this in the show notes, but had a pretty interesting tweet storm that opens up with unpopular opinion, product market fit isn't a thing. I'm not even sure it's a useful concept for startups. And later she says, when we call product market fit a thing, we trick startups into thinking that it's just a gate to pass through, and then they can go nuts and pour cash into customer acquisition, et cetera. So, that's a provocative opening line, that product market fit isn't a thing and may not be a useful concept. And so there's a lot to say about that. I will definitely recommend that you follow the link here in the show notes. I think that product market fit has to be a thing, and I'm sure that and you can see it. If you dig in there, April has some very thoughtful nuances to add to the whole conversation, and no doubt if you read through this and apply your mind to it, I'm sure you will walk away with some new insights and thoughts as well. And so I chuckled myself as Gia was having that response, because I'm sure it was fresh on her mind. And for what it's worth, one of those nuances being that, as Gia said at a different point in the conversation, you can lose product market fit. It's not a gate that you walk through, and then you've made it, and it's home free from there. Things are constantly changing and moving, and so that's a useful insight, and I'm sure that is part of April Dunford's, I think, issue, I guess, with the phrase, or how it's being used, whatever. Also thought that it was a great takeaway when Gia was talking about finding the things that you can leverage painlessly. She recognized in her organization at that place and at that time, it was difficult for her to get certain product or engineering resources. I think it's pragmatic. It's important to look at that and not make a judgment call as to whether or not that is good or bad, so much as that is the state of things. And certainly one response you could have to that is to spend some energy to change things. I'm not saying that this is only what Gia did, but what I heard and what I think is a great takeaway is she simply put her energy and and her mind into areas where she did have leverage, and where her team did have some strengths, and she worked with those. I like that. I like the idea of finding what you can leverage painlessly. Find where you have control. That doesn't mean do the lazy thing. It means do the easy thing. And I think there's something there. I'm trying to tease that out in my own head. If there's something there, like I don't think many people want to be lazy, as an ambition. But isn't it kind of true that our inner selves do kind of want to be lazy, or want to do the easy thing, or the way that water finds the path of least resistance, the way that lots of things in nature look for the easy way, not because it's lazy, but because it's easier and more efficient. And in the case that Gia was talking about, allowed them to have outsized impacts from their efforts. And I've heard, you've probably also heard it said, find the things that come easy to you. Find the things that to other people look like work, but to you it will feel easy, or it will feel like play. So I think there's something in there that I think is a strong takeaway. I think finally, definitely something that has come up multiple times here is just the prioritization of customer research and customer interviews. And that's just going to be better. It's going to lead to more effective marketing. It'll lead to it will lead to a product that is more likely to delight your customers. And so that's just something that continues to come up and up again. And in that little segment, I wonder if you picked up on it, where Gia said, I mean, that's what marketers do, is listen. And I loved that. I think that for a very long time, and certainly it continues today, I think in certain circles, the stereotype as marketing as being interruptive, marketing as a megaphone. And so I like that, it just gives me a lot of respect and admiration for Gia's approach. That for her, what do you mean? Marketing is about listening. Marketers listen, and then use that messaging to share it back out to folks who haven't heard of you yet. That is good marketing, as opposed to running around with a bullhorn and trying to convince everybody to see and find the value in the thing that you've made. So I like that mental image a whole lot, or that phrase, marketing is listening, or that's what marketers do, is they listen. But as always, would love to hear what you thought, what stuck out to you. You can find me on Twitter at BRHEA. That's B as in begonia, R as in rose, H as in hibiscus, E as in echinacea, and A as in amaranthus. Is that a thing? Let me know what you thought and how I can make this podcast better. It's yours. Any topics I should cover, guests I should reach out to, please let me know. And until next time, I'm Brian Ray. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Listen, if you dig this show and you want to hear more, then please head on over to Apple Podcasts or Google Play and leave a review. It really is the best way to help other people find the show, which is great for my guests, which is great for the show, which then makes it easier to attract more guests. You see where this is going. So if you're listening and you think other folks should be, please leave a review. And if not for me, then do it for the extremely cool group of people who've agreed to be the first guests on my show, knowing that it's brand new with very little to offer them. Jane Portman, Claire Solentraub, Gia Laudi, Margaret Kelsey, Janelle Allen, Andrea Hill, and by the time you hear this, plenty more. These are all really busy people who already have an audience of their own and were so gracious to me when I said, hey, I'm launching a brand new podcast with no listeners, and here's what it's about. Are you game? And they said yes. So if not for me, do it for them. Leave a review, tell a friend, spread the word. And until next time, I'm Brian Ray.